If you could hop into a time machine and set the dial to a Dutch residential street in the mid-1960s, you might feel like you've landed on another planet. These are 10 everyday things Dutch people did in the 60s that have now disappeared. 10. The cigarette cup on the birthday table. Let's start with the one that feels most scandalous today. The birthday party. Nowadays, if you light up a cigarette at a social gathering, you're usually banished to the balcony or the garden. But in the 60s, a party without smoke wasn't a party at all. When guests arrived, there was almost always a glass or silver holder filled with cigarettes. You didn't ask if someone smoked, you assumed they did. By 9 p.m., the living room would be thick with smoke. You'd wake up the next morning with your hair and clothes smelling like an old tavern. But back then, that was just the scent of a good time. 9. The physical struggle of the rotary phone. Long before we had glass rectangles in our pockets, we had the beast. This was the black or grey PTT rotary phone, and it usually lived on a small table in the hallway. The hallway was strategically chosen because it was central, but it was also usually the coldest place in the house. Calling someone was a physical task. You stuck your finger in the hole at the first digit and dragged the dial clockwise until it hit the metal stop. If you missed the 7th digit, too bad, there was no back button. You hung up and started the whole process over. With all this in mind, you know that privacy was non-existent. 8. Kids as unsecured cargo in the car. In the 60s, the concept of child safety in a car was basically a suggestion, or more accurately, a myth. Back then, the back seat was a free-for-all. There were no seatbelts, no booster seats, and certainly no headrests. If you had a large family, you'd just cram 4 or 5 kids onto the bench. If the car turned left, the whole pack of siblings would slide to the right. If the driver had to brake suddenly, your safety system was your dad throwing his right arm out to pin you against the seat. On long trips, kids would simply lie down on the rear window shelf or on the floorboards to sleep. It sounds horrifying, but also kind of cozy. 7. The ritual of wash day and the Saturday bath. Hygiene in the 1960s was a scheduled event. Most Dutch households didn't have a dedicated bathroom with a walk-in shower. Instead, there was a strict weekly rhythm that kept the family clean. Monday was almost universally laundry day. This was a grueling, all-day operation for the mother of the house. Then came Saturday. Since there was no shower, a zinc tub was brought into the kitchen. To save water and energy, the whole family used the same bathwater. The youngest children went first, then the older kids, then finally the parents. By the time the last person got in, the water was lukewarm and a bit grey, but you scrubbed yourself clean anyway. You had to be fresh for Sunday morning. 6. The morning clink of the milkman. Long before the era of delivery apps, the Dutch suburbs had a sophisticated silent delivery network called the milkman. Every morning, long before the sun was up, the milkman would do his job. He drove a small electric cart or a horse-driven wagon filled with crates of heavy glass bottles. If you needed something extra, you didn't go to a website. You left a handwritten note in the empty bottle. 2 bottles of milk and a pint of custard today, please. It was a system built entirely on trust and local knowledge. 5. The SRV van, a grocery store on wheels. While the milkman handled the dairy, the SRV van handled the rest. Before huge supermarkets like Albert Heijn dominated every corner, many Dutch people bought their groceries from a bus that parked right in front of their house. The SRV man would drive through the neighborhood, ringing a loud bell to announce his arrival. Within minutes, the streets would be flooded with people. You'd step up into the van, which was essentially a tiny, cramped aisle of shelves. It was the original social network. You didn't just buy your coffee and biscuits, you also caught up on all the local gossip. When the SRV van eventually lost the war against the cheaper, larger supermarkets in the late 70s, the Dutch neighborhood lost one of its most important social hubs. 4. The lukewarm mystery of school milk. If you were a child in the 1960s, school milk is a memory you can probably still taste. It was part of a government initiative to ensure that every Dutch child grew up big and strong. early morning around 10 a.m., a crate of small cardboard cartons would be brought into the classroom. The problem was that these crates often sat in the hallway for an hour or two before being distributed. By the time you got yours, the milk was rarely cold. You'd poke your plastic straw through its foil and drink the lukewarm milk while the teacher read a story. For some kids it was a treat, for others it was a daily struggle to keep it down. 3. The 12 p.m. hot meal. In modern Netherlands, lunch is a quick sandwich eaten at a desk or on the go. But in the 1960s, the main meal of the day happened at noon. At 12 p.m. sharp, the country essentially stopped. Factories and businesses would close for a long break, and fathers would hop on their bicycles to ride home for lunch. The children would come home from school, and mother would have a steaming pot of potatoes, vegetables, and a piece of meat on the table. This was the warm meal. After eating, there might be a short nap or a quick listen to the radio news, and then everyone heads back out to work or school. 2. The communal television warming up. Television in the 60s was an event, not a background noise. Most families had only one TV, a massive wooden box that lived in the corner of the living room. It didn't just turn on, it had to warm up. You'd flip the switch and wait, watching as a tiny white dot in the center of the screen slowly expanded into a picture. There were only 2 channels and they didn't broadcast all day. Because there were so few choices, everyone watched the same things. Programs like Expat or the Eurovision Song Contest were national experiences. If you didn't have a TV, you'd go to your neighbor's house to watch. It was a shared culture that made everyone feel like they were part of one big conversation. And finally, number 1. The sacred Sunday best. Today we live in an era of casual Friday that has extended to every day of the week. But in the 60s, the distinction between the week and the weekend was visible in the fabric of your clothes. Sunday was the day of Sunday best. Even if you weren't particularly religious, you dressed up out of respect for the day. Fathers wore suits and ties, while mothers wore their finest dresses and pearls. But the children, well, they were squeezed into stiff collars and itchy wool sweaters. You stayed in those clothes all day, whether you were going to church or just visiting your Oma for coffee. You weren't allowed to play outside in your Sunday clothes. Heaven forbid you got a grass stain on your good trousers. It gave the week a sense of structure that has largely disappeared in our world of hoodies and sweatpants. The world of the 1960s was, in many ways, more difficult. It was physically demanding, less private, and much more rigid. But as we look back on these 10 vanished habits, it's hard not to feel nostalgia for the simplicity of it all.